Hello again. This is our third segment focused on shareholders specifically. And in this segment, I'm going to talk about cumulative voting and a couple of additional rights that attach to shareholding, right? So we've explored the concept of voting, voting rights, how voting occurs, is another additional matter we should consider. All right, most states permit, and some states require, shareholders to elect directors by cumulative voting. It's an interesting phenomenon with interesting implications that I'll talk about in a second. But this is basically designed to keep minorities from being oppressed within the corporation. The concept of minority oppression is the idea that if one controls the corporation or has a block of shares that control the corporation, that one can severely disadvantage those who are not in a position to control the corporation, including with regard to dividends, which are distributions of profits, timing them. If they favor those who own most of the capital of the most of the, whose shares represent most of the capital contributions to the company, then maybe the timing of dividends can be wider, right? Whereas with smaller shareholders, maybe they need to have more consistent payment. And it also accounts for the fact that there are maybe different classes of shares in some companies, including in closely held companies. So what cumulative voting does is it basically gives each shareholder a number of votes that are equal to the number of slots that are going to be filled times the number of shares that they own, right? So if I have 5 shares and we need to elect 5 directors, I get 25 votes. If I have 1 share and we need to elect 5 directors, then I get 5 votes, right? With cumulative voting, however, it's not simply a disregard of the democratic principle of one man, one vote, because what happens to those 25 votes? There are 5 directors slots that we're trying to fill, right? And there are 8 candidates. Let's say that this is a contested election, right? What is it that happens? Well, I have my 25 votes because I have my 5 shares. Next guy has his 5 votes because he's got his 1 share. Maybe there are other people who are small shareholders like us. Maybe we like these 2 guys, right? These 3 guys. Maybe we have 2 or 3 candidates among these minority shareholders whom we think will be more beneficial to the minority shareholders. And as a result, we band together. Now, we don't just have one man, one vote. We have a number of votes, right? So I say, okay, you have your 5 votes. I have my 25 votes, and he has his 15 votes, and they have this. Different people have different numbers of votes, right? If we band together, we can get our 3 electors directed, right? I'll split my vote 1/3 between each of the candidates that we, the minority shareholders, prefer, right? So I may put 8 towards one, 8 towards another, and 9 towards, what is that? That's 9, 8, and 8, 16, plus 9 is 25, right? I've split effectively my vote 3 ways to support 2 additional candidates that wouldn't have been supported by my vote otherwise, because I was going for my candidate, right? By linking with these other minority shareholders, we get 2 or 3 of our candidates together because the person with 1 vote has given 2 of his votes to my candidate, 1 to another candidate, and 2 to his original candidate, right? And so this type of coalition building among minority shareholders, and not even just among, so it can be large minority shareholders, right? Or those who have partial control of a company that one can ally with. There are different types of alliances that might arise depending on the situation. Cumulative voting permits that. And I would note, just not merely as an aside, it is interesting that this phenomenon arose specifically in the context of corporate law to defend minority shareholders. Lonnie Guinier, who is a legal thinker, former Clinton nominee who went up in flames famously because of a misinterpretation of her legal scholarship, that she was a proponent of a type of voting in the electoral political system that would have amounted to cumulative voting, right? And it's very interesting theory that she posed. What she was essentially saying is that cumulative voting within corporations encourages coalition building among those who find common interests where they might not have found them otherwise, right? And so the notion is that cumulative voting, if it were implemented within the electoral system, would actually foster a better, a stronger democracy, less severe candidates as far as positioning, and more responsiveness to the majority of the people who don't cluster on the ends, but who cluster, more towards the middle. Cumulative voting would help to encourage moderation in democracy. That's not just an aside. It's meant to sort of emphasize how what the impact of cumulative voting has been on the corporate world. All right. So take a look at the example of cumulative voting. It basically walks through what I've just said with a slate of directors and a certain number of shares, and it will basically enlighten you about that process that I've just explained. Other voting techniques. We mentioned proxies, right? So you can vote your shares yourself, right? You can assign your proxy to someone of your choice, right? You can solicit proxies, right? You can engage in cumulative voting, right? And then also, shareholders can band together and create these things called shareholder voting agreements. Now, a shareholder voting agreement is different from a shareholder agreement that I mentioned in the previous segment. All right. When I was talking about a shareholder agreement before, I was talking about a contract that governs the rights of those who are given shares, who receive shares or who are entitled to shares in the corporation. What a shareholder voting agreement does is it, for a certain purpose or for a certain meeting, it basically is an agreement among shareholders that they will vote a certain way on a certain matter. And these are usually held to be valid and enforceable against the parties who undertake them. So, and again, shareholders could accomplish virtually the same thing through the use of proxies as well. All right. All right. Thank you. That's you can move on to the next segment after you respond to the prompt. All right. Thank you.